Welcome back to the afternoon session of Open Source Ethics and Innovation in AI. We've got one more panel before we split out into two parallel sessions, and we'll tell you more about that when it's time to get there. But first, we're talking tech transfer and open source software. Tech transfer is typically associated with the idea of transferring research from higher education through commercialization, licensing, and startups. But is that all? What does this need to be done only with closed source software? What's the role that open source software might play in the type of tech transfer that we've previously seen? To help us browse through the possibilities, I'm delighted to introduce Jacob and David to chair the following panel, Open Source Software and Tech Transfer, Exploring Impact for Innovation and Industry in the UK. Jacob has more than 25 years of experience in tech transfer and open source software. He's now a distinguished fellow of Ogov's Open Solutions for Government. And David has 20 years of experience in open source software, most specifically in software used in research. He's now building an open source program office at University College London. So if you want to pick his brains about opening your own open source program office, I'm sure he'd be delighted to walk you through that. You might notice that we've got a range of diverse panel perspectives on here, and we've really tried to bring a broad breadth of experience to this panel. So Jacob and David, please, the floor is yours.
First
I don't have a mic up, so
you're there.
Hopefully
here.
You can hear me. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, great. There we go. It didn't come through. Hi, I'm Jacob Green. I wanted to, this is an interesting quote. The science of today is the technology of tomorrow. Can't see it here. We didn't quite come through on the slide from Edward Teller, a famous quote, which is kind of epitomizes what we're looking at in terms of technology transfer, moving the ideas of science and knowledge into society for that impact. This is a exploratory discussion we're going to have here today. And we'll be starting by asking some questions, not giving answers. I like to think of this as the way we presented in the very beginning of the work today, looking at it from, we have a challenge around AI and moving an entire segment, not a specific widget or a specific product that we're trying to move from science to industry. We're trying to move a whole field to advance and bring AI and other technology into society. We have to look at it, in my opinion, as a socio-technical way of looking at it. There's lots of different aspects that come into that. So when we talk about knowledge transfer or technology transfer, we're not just moving it for one product. We're moving a whole knowledge base into society for impact. It requires a lot of coordination between various different actors and close feedback loops. This is another diagram that tries to, that I stole from someone's, not stole, but I'm highlighting from someone's graduate research on how it's a dynamic thing between policy, infrastructure, markets, culture, industry, academia, and getting all of these different stakeholders to work together is a complex challenge. Circling back to some of the goals that were presented in the morning, of how, if we, first defining what are our goals. If this is the goal that we're looking to achieve, how can we use technology transfer to help empower this goal of moving the wide breadth and the rapid breadth of innovation that's happening from researchers and academia and national labs into society? Can we use open source methods to achieve that? At lunch, I want to bring up something that a conversation we had at lunch, which was how do we move AI into the construction industry? As a real-world example of what we're trying to achieve here, this is a hard challenge where you have a lot of stakeholders that we don't want to harm. We don't want to disrupt necessarily their business models. We want this to be a win-win thing, but we want to move that innovation into the construction field to help, again, with this. Research and research code bases can take us only so far. That's step one, is opening the knowledge. The other 9 steps are now trying to move that knowledge into a whole industry that is risk adverse, that might have various entrenched ways of doing things, long development cycles in production of buildings and stuff. It is a complex challenge that's going to take multiple different facets of looking at this from policymakers, educators, workforce development, and moving things forward. If we take that example, I want to let's level set on some definitions. What is open source? We throw the term around a lot. If I were to have a room full of lawyers from tech transfer, they're going to talk about open source in terms of the license. If this was a room full of developers, we'd be talking about open source in terms of the code basis. If this was a room full of open source foundations at, let's say, an open source conference, we could be talking about cooperation between various different stakeholders in a whole industry. The economics of cooperation below the value line in the auto industry, et cetera. The other way to look at open source is about a method of cooperation and methodologies of cooperation and the economics of cooperation. It is all of these things that are encompassed when I throw around the term open source. So when we say what can open source do to help facilitate tech transfer of knowledge into industry, it's the combination of all of these factors, most importantly, the cooperation aspects and the methodologies of the cooperation to move the knowledge to society. It is a system of systems approach, which recognizes that community and the open source communities that get created around projects are just as valuable for knowledge transfer as the open code bases or the licenses, et cetera. We should also define what is higher education. David, as you heard, is going to be talking about the open source program office, creating at University College London here, becomes the nexus of open source for higher education. It's kind of a model. Typically, we think about tech transfer from higher ed in terms of moving research into industry. I think of higher education from 4 pillars: education, the research that gets done, the transfer of that knowledge to society, and the 4th one is civics, or community engagement, the idea of recognition that researchers and UCL itself sits within a broader ecosystem within London and within the UK, and shares other responsibilities, for example, that are put on it by UKRI and its funders, et cetera. It is part of a vibrant ecosystem. Furthermore, when we talk about tech transfer offices and how did we get there, it's helpful a little bit to define a little bit how we got there. I'm more familiar with the US-based system, which started out as tech transfer offices were a response to a government priority to move US innovation into society. They created the Bayh-Dole Act in around 1980, which incentivized and allowed universities to make profits and generate revenue from patents supporting startups, taking a cut of the startups, and various royalties. Something similar happened when I was reading up in the UK here in the mid-1980s. That's how we started. It's been, what, close to now 40 years? It's an opportunity for us to re-examine what tech transfer means when we now have to move at the pace we're being asked to move at, for AI as an example, but many different digital innovations, moving that knowledge into society as fast as we can. That's why I think it's important to think about what is the next tech transfer office. Is that the open source program office? This idea of the nexus of cooperation, the nexus of understanding how to work within communities as the knowledge transfer mechanism. We'll be talking a little bit about the practitioner's way that the Alan Turing Institute is participating in, of bringing together industry somewhat like yourselves with researchers for those bi-directional conversations and knowledge exchanges is an important aspect of what we think of the next generation of technology transfer that goes beyond just the traditional tech transfer office, patents, copyright licenses, and building startups. To some degree, we have a greenfield situation where you get to help define what that is as you work with the Alan Turing Institute, using the Turing Way, working with UCL and their OSPO. This is not all a rosy picture, however. There are a lot of challenges facing that I wanted to just highlight. Some of those being, there's sometimes a misalignment of incentive structures. We're asking researchers to work in the broader field with all of you, when right now researchers are more focused on writing their papers, getting those papers out, getting tenure, and repeating the process. We've asked researchers to go as far as I think we can stretch it in terms of the entrepreneurship of those researchers. So we have to look at some and be realistic about some of those challenges. How do we get industry like yourselves more involved? I would point to a great experiment out of the University of California, Santa Cruz, which brings in industry into a community around the research at the beginning of the grant to build a knowledge transfer mechanism at the beginning of the grant cycle, rather than at the end of the grant where you then throw it over the tech transfer office to say, now you deal with this. We have challenges of inclusivity, of not just thinking about going back to the idea of what is higher education, to making sure that all of our universities are participating in this, not just the research universities. So this comes in when we'll talk about it soon in terms of education, workforce development, and how we use these mechanisms to get everyone involved in the broader goals of knowledge transfer. I'm excited for the panel that we brought together. We've presented here some ideas. This is the start of a conversation and an exploration. We have no definitive answers right now. We'll be speaking to Ron, who's at a research university, or at a non-research university. We'll be talking to Bastien, who's heavily involved in public administrations. Kirstie, who is one of the founders of the Turing Way. Aida, here at one of the national labs here. Simon from Digital Services, who's been doing lots of consulting. The firm does lots of consulting in this area. Miguel here at UCL, been heavily involved in medical tech translation. And of course, David, I'll turn it over to him now to talk about the UCL's plans.
Thank you. Right, so, that's loud. I'm David. I'm going to tell you a bit of my story so that you know how that comes about. So I'm a research software engineer at UCL, and particularly at the center of the amazing advanced research computing in UCL. So there, our motive, our job as a research software engineers is to help researchers to write good software. And that software is the point of having good software, improve better research, right? So that's our motivation with all the things that the Turing Way is promoting on reproducibility and accessibility, making the data fair, all the things together. Now, I was a researcher, or I am still a researcher in physics, but as a physicist, I never got any training in software. So I really find what this group that I'm working now produce to the researchers, because we support the researchers, giving them the things that they didn't have. But that lack of training that I had during my undergrads and my degrees, my PhD and stuff, was I fulfilled that learning about open source. I become involved in the open source community by writing code, sharing it, and getting different roles in the community that give me to places I never thought I was going to be. So when we think about research, we can think a few things. One is there's a lot of reinventing the wheel. Many researchers do the same thing once and again because they don't know that it exists. So what happened? That stops innovation, and that have some costs, right? That is not being shared. Then we have to assume that every software is buggy. Like there's bugs in every piece of software that we write. If that is only seen by one person, that's not going to be, they're not going to get those bugs detected till later when they have to retract a paper. So there's a problem there for them not having that code seen by other people. And finally is community. So if you, like the sentence I tell to my students, sharing is caring. So you share your code, you provide the things around there to other people to use it, that will help them to create links, to help astrophysicists collaborate with neuroscientists, to create that innovation that was not otherwise possible. So those three things in open source, kind of the thing that motivated me to do open source was kind of the link for me to say, okay, we need something in the university that protects that. And that is in the shape of what Jacob was saying of the open source program office. So essentially it's an office that it helps to support and promote open source, not only software, but everything around open source, in this case, in the university, but it could be in any other type of industry. For me, Jacob talked about 4 pillars as well. On the university, I have same also 4 pillars, but slightly different. One of them is research, right? In a university like UCL, we have a research part of it, a research component. And I say, like the 3 things I said before, is open science, open software. It's all very linked, right? With the same things that I was saying before. The other pillar is education. And one of the things that the universities do, the main thing, is to educate students, to educate the society. And as part of an OSPO, you could educate people and say, okay, this is how you consume and how you develop open source. But I want to take it even beyond that to something like it's not only the creation and use of the software, but the philosophy and the community. What are the values of an open source community? And how is that embedded into the whole thing of education? The next pillar for me in a university is infrastructure. There is so many things are running in a university. What are the software and the things that keep the university running? How different is my university that I'm working on with another university? I'm sure they have the same problems. I'm sure they have the same kind of or very similar processes. So can all those things be combined? Can we reduce the cost of each university running their own individual silos of, I don't know, counting students or checking their grades, to have it in something that is common across all and is open source so that all of them could contribute and feedback. And my last pillar after education, research, and infrastructure is community. Like community in a university is not only, one might think like, oh, that's when a researcher collaborates with another researcher in another university. Sure, that's part of the community, but the community is going beyond that. And a university, you have it in a city, and that city, being a university there, shapes the city, change what is in there. So that community have to be not only in the academics or the students that are in that university, but how it connects with the rest. And that's where you come in place, right? That's where universities have to collaborate to share expertise with people outside the universities and also bring that into the university. So these are the kind of things that I'm thinking on the OSPO and how that brings into the tech transfer. Here in London, I say I come from UCL, together with King's, Queen Mary, and Imperial. Those 4 universities in London are 4 of a kind that form almost 25% of a type of universities in UK, which are very large, have a lot of research. It's very heavy on research. They do a lot of cutting-edge studies and analysis on everything. And all that combined, thinking here in London, think about the power that you have been in London with these universities around. What are the tech transfer that you would like to have? What are the things that will help you to connect more with universities, the university to connect you more? And that's kind of the things that I expect to get today from the panel that we have, so that we can extract that information and help us to, as Jacob was saying, there's not answers yet to those questions, but how can we create the tech transfer combined with open source that we would like to have? And I think that we can bring now the rest of the panel and we can discuss those questions. Good. So please, stay there. We have first the Ron interview. First Ron, okay. I cannot be under, so let's stay there. No, I cannot be there because you talk with Ron. So you go there. You need to go there.
Hello, Ron. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you.
I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell your accolades, where you're coming from, if you would.
Okay, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to share with you. My name is Ron Williams, and I am an associate professor of management and the founding director of the Center for Strategic Entrepreneurship at Coppin State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Most of my career, actually, I've been in higher education for 40 years, and most of the first 11 years were spent in research or Research One institutions at Johns Hopkins University and George Washington University in DC. And then I left that world and landed at a community-centric, community-facing, historically Black college and university in Baltimore, Coppin State University, 28 years ago, and I've been there ever since. So that's my background. I can share a little bit more about Coppin State that will provide context for the discussion that we're going to enter in. It's a 125-year-old institution, very, very productive in terms of producing teachers and educators in its early history during the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the northern industrial centers. And it has that kind of community-facing sort of education-focused institution. One misnomer is when we refer to research and non-research institutions is that research does not happen in non-research institutions, but it does. We still are evaluated on the basis of teaching, research, and service, and research is very much a part of that, but it's slightly different in terms of how we are evaluated.
Thank you much, Ron. We've been talking about tech transfer today. Can you share with us a little bit about your thoughts on what tech transfer means for Coppin State?
Yes, we're using the terminology open source, but when I hear that terminology, I simply think of access and the democratization of processes and procedures that will allow for tech transfer and knowledge transfer and commercialization. At Coppin State University, because we are a non-research institution and more focused on teaching in terms of our evaluations, it happens a little differently. We do not have, traditionally have not had the infrastructure necessary for technology and commercial and knowledge transfer and commercialization. For example, we do not have a tech transfer office. Therefore, we rely on what the University System of Maryland provides for us in terms of access to those types of support, which does not always translate well when it comes to a smaller community-facing teaching institution in the whole University System of Maryland higher ed infrastructure. There are about 12 or 13 institutions that are a part of that. So how do we transfer our knowledge and technology in that context? It's very important because in terms of productivity, the smaller community-facing, particularly historically Black colleges and universities in the U.S. are highly productive in terms of our value-added education, I will refer to it as. In other words, we are able to engage students that may not typically, may come with some sort of a deficit, whether it be a financial or preparation, but we are able to engage them and bring them to a place where they are very productive, able to compete in the marketplace. And in fact, one of the major funders, federal funders, the National Science Foundation in the U.S., there was a study not too long ago that showed that institutions such as ours, in terms of productivity per dollar invested, was 5 times that of the typical Ivy Plus school, those very elite research institutions such as the Stanfords and Harvards of the world. So our productivity is very high in terms of productivity per dollar invested, but we don't necessarily have the same infrastructure. So in order to overcome that, and I think we're getting better at it, it's necessary for us to find ways to overcome barriers. For example, the cost of protecting IP and faculty IP would be one of them. So recently, we have engaged in a project with a supplier, a software company that allows us to bring down the cost of the application process for protecting faculty intellectual property. We also take a very transdisciplinary approach. I do personally. Every research team I put together is across disciplines. We'll have everyone from a dance professor to a chemistry professor on the same research team, which requires us to do a lot of work in terms of the philosophy of science and the particular epistemology that they may be working from. But we can do that kind of work and translate their approaches to science so that they have a better understanding of the contributions that they make. Also, in terms of connecting in the ecosystem, we do it in the same way, the same public, private, academic, and community stakeholders. We make a real effort to connect and utilize a value pool process. Now, what do I mean by that? You mentioned the construction industry and how do we bring AI into the construction industry? Well, for me, taking a value pool approach to that is very simple. We solve a problem. We ask them, what is your problem? What is your pain point? And we engage in applied research that solves real problems for particular sectors. That increases the value of the research that we do, but also allows us to have not only economic, but social and technological impact when we do so.
Thank you much. I'm going to end on one quick more question. We're here today at the at Bridge AI, which is trying to look at trying to have economic development for the UK. You've had some experience at looking at economic development from a regional perspective. in terms of cooperation. And I wondered if you might, as we look at open source as a methodology to engage between industry and academia, you've touched on many of the 4 pillars of academia. Can you discuss a little bit about the idea of economic development as a core function of tech transfer and what you're doing?
Yes, I love that you use the words cooperation and collaboration, because economic impact or economic development, we must be reminded that economics is a social science. It's taught in business schools quite often, but it is still, at the end of the day, by every definition, a social science. So we have to also not just include the economic impact when we're talking about economic development, how many jobs are created, how it's going to have an impact on tax revenue and those kinds of economic considerations, but we also have to give consideration to social impact. How is this going to have an impact on quality of life indicators and those things that define social movement, socio-economic movement? So you used a socio-technical framework at the very beginning, but we have to make sure that we insert economics. So social impact, economic impact, and technological impact, converging those 3. Also, as we work in these ecosystems, making sure that we are continuously pushing and advocating for greater collaborative competencies. What are the competencies that are necessary in economic development for those who are participating in terms of collaboration and cooperation? We assume that because people are in particular positions, that they are competent when it comes to collaboration and relational competencies. But we have to start with those kind of sociological assessments up front so that we can get the greatest return out of the economic impact that we want to have.
Thank you very much, Ron, for speaking to us today.
Thank you.
We're going to now go to the panel. David, would you like to introduce the panel?
So let's hear about our panel, who they are, and introduce themselves. So please start from here, from Simon. Tell who you are and where you come from exactly, and a bit roughly.
Yeah, sure. In 2 sentences, Simon Porter, Digital Science, VP Research Futures, formerly Research Administration at the University of Melbourne.
Thank you.
And hi, everyone. I'm Kirstie Whitaker, and I used to work at the Alan Turing Institute. I'm actually just finishing up and moving on to a new role in 2025. But I remain the founder of the Turing Way. And one of the things that I'm very excited to speak on the panel about is the fact that the Turing Way is an open source community that is multi-stakeholder and developing a praxis, so bringing together theory, practice, and that experiential learning in how to participate in an ecosystem of open source software.
Hi again, everyone. Aida Mehonic. I'm still at the Alan Turing Institute, and I lead a team of research application managers at the Institute, formerly in Kirstie's program. We are a team that attempts to fulfill some of the role of a tech transfer office. So the Turing does not actually have a tech transfer office, but it has this little team of research application managers, and we work in the open source, and we have our unique thesis, perhaps a little bit radical, around how we get research to get out of the lab and put it in the hands of kind of users, user organizations, like ensure adoption. And I'm happy to share a little bit about that later.
Thank you. Miguel.
Hi everyone, I'm Miguel Xochicale. I'm Senior Research Software Engineer at UCL. My background is in biomedical engineering, robotics and AI. And basically I'm really interested in the transition from going to research to clinical translation, where you go into this pathway of validating your data set, doing lots of testing of your models, complying with regulations, and how we us as researchers use open source software tools like BTK, ITK, Holoscan from NVIDIA, how we collaborate with them, how we build the relationship. And I've been trying to create this community, open source software for surgical technologies. So how we actually engage more in having kind of same vision and training the new scientists or new engineers that adopting these technologies, and how we made this in like with open source tools. Yeah, so that's what I can bring to the year.
Thank you. Bastien?
Hi, I'm Bastien Guerry from the French government. I run the open source program office for the Inter-Ministerial Digital Directorate there. And 3 years ago, I co-founded a community of civil servants called Blue Hats, that are all the civil servants passionate about sharing open source skills and code and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir?
Bastien, you just started us off, and I'm curious. You have civil servants moving, working on public administration code bases. Do you see an opportunity for the research and academic community to get involved in that process and transfer the innovations that they're exposed to into the public administrations?
Yes. So Blue Hats community is more like a meta community with civil servants from all the ministries. That are maybe 2,000 of them. Two ministries are particularly active, like the Ministry of Education. We have a GitLab forge where all the teachers are sharing free knowledge resources, sometimes code, sometimes not code, just educational resources. And we also have the higher education and research community. This community is backed by the Open Science program that is led since, I would say, 10 years. Started with open data, open access, and for the last 3 years, made progress on the open source front, by recognizing source code as a high value asset for researchers, which means that you have to handle it in a meaningful way. So when we started to list all the source code published by public administrations on code.gov.fr, we recognized that there was a lot of GitLab forges for higher education and research labs, for example. We have more than 80 GitLab instances hosting source code from research labs. So we started to wonder, how do you value this work by researchers? So we created a free software research prize that is recognizing the hard work of researchers producing open source software. So it's been, the Ministry of Higher Education gave the prize. The minister herself gave the prize. So that's a huge recognizing. Then we also wrote a report on tech transfer for open source software. We analyzed more than 1,300 software and counted the number of open source licenses, the number of startups. And all this work is published since a few months and is very useful for building a strategy. One part of the strategy, and I'm going to finish with this, is the CNRS Institute, starting a new program called Open. This program is specifically targeting researchers who want to continue to publish their source code as open source, but want to run a business around it. And the program is about helping them with resources that are specialized on open source good practices, 1 year of developer value to help them build their product as a product, not just as source code, because that's maybe the difficult part. We can talk about this, but going from a source code that's useful for science to a product that's useful beyond science and to reach out to users out there and to the market is really difficult. Everyone knows this, but there is this new CNRS Open program that is specifically dedicated to that. And I hope in a few years we can share useful insight from that.
That's good. Thank you. That brings us to Miguel. And you were saying you come from the kind of working with the medical industry. And for me, the medical industry looks like something that is very close, like it's not open at all. And there is some like reasoning of that, like there's a lot of research and innovation coming from different companies. They want to keep those machines, those big products out of these things. But from your perspective, what is the big barriers that makes the translation of innovation in university into clinic and practice, and how can open source software help into that?
Yeah, that's really a huge challenge for researchers, because once you reach that moment where you publish your, let's say, journal paper, you work very hard to produce results, produce I guess the outcomes, algorithms of your research. But then going from that point to actually going to a clinical translation is very long journey. It could be like 5 to 10 years, and it's not only one person. It requires a regulatory specialist, QMS specialist. Our department, they use Advanced Research Computer Center. We specialize in software, but we also need people from QMS as well. And that's also another of the challenges that we are not aware when you are thinking about, I want to translate my needle tracking project or my eye tracking, or segmentation algorithm for pituitary surgery or any kind of medical imaging, right? So that's where the challenges start to being, more maybe realistic. That you need more people to go into translation. So yeah, so what we can do as universities to maybe start training earlier researchers that this translation requires like a team of specialists, and having conversations earlier in this kind of plan of translating your application into the clinic. So require more training, early training, like for example, organizing workshops, bringing together specialists, connecting people from industry and academia, writing up white papers, creating, GitHub organizations, open sourcing this kind of community. So you bring together more people. That's where we are now. And there are actually few examples on the diabetes and insulin. So they are doing open sourcing the algorithms and going to this kind of FDA process to be regulated. That's like 5 years journey. So it's really long one. But that's where we are now. So hopefully, if we keep training our researchers, we may have a good example at UCL.
Sorry, I lost where we were. Kirstie, how are you?
I'm doing great.
We have this great opportunity with the Practitioners Hub, this idea of experiential knowledge transfer through community. Typically, we think of open source as the code, and we prepare people to engage in code bases. But the knowledge transfer that can come of the experiential learning of building a community and being part of the community and transferring knowledge around that seems a greenfield opportunity to engage between industry and academia and researchers. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about where the Turing Way is thinking of this and how it might be scaled to have that impact that Bridge AI and UKI are looking for?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I wanted to, in thinking about answering this question, I was really struck by a very common, very quick response to a good idea that happens in an open source environment within the ecosystem that says, great, sure, want to open a PR, ? And the reason I want to highlight that is actually this huge barrier, because if you don't know what it means, if you don't know what PR means, a pull request, if you don't know what it means to open a PR, and if you also don't understand the sociological dynamics of what does it mean to open a pull request, even if you technically know how to interact with a code base, which, to be clear, a lot of people don't, even if they have a lot of expertise in many other tech areas, this idea of sending your ideas out into a world where you don't necessarily know the people, you don't know the interpersonal dynamics, and you don't know whether your idea is valued, is a huge barrier. And what it does is it perpetuates an exclusionary bias, such that the most confident people are going to happily be like, sure, you should hear my great idea. And the people who are sort of more structurally oppressed across our societies will not be as likely to participate. And so when we started the Turing Way, on the surface, it looks like a book, like it looks like an online book, a set of guides that tell you what to do. But actually, we build on GitHub with the express purpose of helping people to understand what it feels like and take those learnings of participating in a public review forum of people saying, like, I want to change your ideas, or I think it could be slightly different, or sometimes, honestly, no, we don't want your nice idea, take it somewhere else. And what we want to do is create a very, very safe, a very inclusive community of people who are trained and knowledgeable and able to go out and bring those skills to their own projects, organizations, communities. And the idea, and I was thinking about Ron's point about decolonizing and empowering people. The greatest promise of open source is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The greatest promise is that you can just work on the most important parts, and you can stand on the shoulders of the giants that have come before you. But if you can't discover what has already come before, then that pathway is inefficient. And if you don't know how to participate in the communities of communities that bring different open source projects together, then again, your discoverability and the pathways to building on top of work that's already happened before are much smaller. And so I think there's something really, really valuable about thinking about how we bring in a more diverse group of people, like the Turing Way practitioners, the experts in residence, make sure that they have the connections already, they have knowledge already, but we build a cohort where they can share their knowledge with each other, and they can knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange those learnings back to their organizations, and actually deliver on the promise of open source, because it is not true currently that open source is making the world more equitable, but it absolutely could, and what we think is it should.
Thank you. Aida, I'm going to follow with a question commenting on what Miguel said and what Kirstie says. What are the challenges that you see on an institution like the Turing for real-world impact for research to be adopted beyond
the lab?
Yeah,
yes,
the lab.
So as Kirstie said, the promise of data science in AI and open source is to really ultimately change the world for the better. In order for that to happen, you have to take this research out of a national institute like the Turing and embed it into user organizations effectively, ethically, responsibly, and all of that. Now, how do you do that? It's incredibly hard. I've had actually, this was an amazing segue from what Miguel has said around basically, when you want to create something that is going to be useful in a hospital, go talk to the hospital before you start writing any code. Because you will probably write the wrong piece of code with your own assumptions before you've spoken to not just the doctors and nurses, the administrators, the IT department. So the kind of, I guess, sometimes obvious, but you'd be surprised, almost like a radical idea in academia, is to have people who, whose job it is to go out in the world and talk to potential users early on. And I think there is this narrative whereby if you're at a university, you do your research. Once your research is done, you kind of knock at the door of the tech transfer office. They're very helpful. They help you set out, like, legally incorporate. They help you with accounting advice, and then you go and, you know, spin out and create like a GDP benefit through your startup. But actually, if, as Bastien has said, you think as a product person early on in your research life cycle and try and think with that kind of product manager's hat early on about your research project, then I think you de-risk someone that path of, you know, spending 2 years on a research problem and realizing it actually is not quite going to be adopted by a hospital because I've minimized the false positives and I should have optimized for something else, but I didn't know. So the kind of simple but maybe radical thesis of the team that Kirstie and I founded at Turing, called the Research Application Management Team, is that you need to go talk to the users early. You do this in the open because that's, you know, you engage with you engage most efficiently and effectively through open working practices, and you think like a product manager. So you represent the sort of the voice of the user early on in the research team. And you've asked me about some of the challenges. I think, I mean, maybe I'm surprised how sometimes cultural challenges are still really a real obstacle. And when I say cultural, I mean, so think about, you know, why we all joined universities or became researchers. I mean, not all of us, but, you know, many of you will have been, you know, through spending a large part of your life in a kind of research setting. You do this. It's a huge tradition of going to a research career because you want to make the world a better place, and then you collaborate openly. Researchers have always collaborated through centuries. It's like a thing that you do as a researcher. You share the outputs of your research. Now, coming back to the challenges, when we say we're going to be these product people working with you in the open in order to ensure there's going to be adoption at the end, sometimes we're seen as sort of radical and disruptors, and sort of people don't trust us always because what you're doing again, like you want to open everything, isn't that sort of risky? And I think there's a sort of a culture in academia. There's a bias towards closeness, and I don't know if it's the journals. I don't know how far back this goes, but I'd say the biggest challenge for me is sort of having people being excited about sharing their research in the open throughout the life cycle, even showing the dead ends. And, you know, when they get sort of false positives and things like that. And yeah, I think probably start there.
Thank you.
Cognizant of time. Thank you, Kirstie, for stepping in today. One of the other panelists that we had was going to be one of the open source foundations here, and so I wanted to relay what they wanted to make sure to share. The Finos Foundation, which is the Linux Foundation, has AI strategic initiatives that include an AI readiness working group that they encourage you to participate in as a real-world example of building a cooperation of a community to knowledge transfer around that. And continuing that thread, I want to go to Simon, who has, I think I'm going to put two parts of a question together for you. One is when we look at tech transfer, typically we look at, we have traditionally looked at patents, copyright licenses, royalties, and supporting startups. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the idea of the new metrics we might be looking at, and then ask you to talk a little bit about, you have a real world example with its OpenLeaf that epitomizes, what we've been talking about here today in terms of an example for tech transfer if you hit those 2 points in the 5 minutes we have left.
Lovely. So 5 minutes. So if we think about from a research administration point of view, we value what we measure. So we so to the foundation at that point, okay, yes, we can measure patents. But if we're looking at this new construction of how we think about tech transfer around collaboration, then really what we're doing is, how do we measure the mechanisms of collaboration? And some of those mechanisms are things like, can we count the research collaborations between researchers and people in industry, and how do we make sure that the people that the researchers in industry are representing themselves in a way that's as findable and discoverable on papers as researchers are? So do our industry collaborators know how to use ORCIDs, for instance? Do they put them on their code repositories? But the other side of mechanisms for collaboration is actually a broader story of how tech transfer has moved from something that's on the peripheral of research administration to something that's in the heart of a research administration. So from a UK point of view, we have collected and measured publications and grants for the purposes of research assessment for a very long time. But it turns out you can use those same pieces of information to construct discovery portals across your university. So maybe we're collecting that information for the purpose of expertise finding, so that we can find our researchers much more directly. And in the framework of open, what we've been doing as institutions as we've been moving that way is taking our closed administrative information and making that open for discovery. And I think that's not only a mechanism for measuring collaboration, but an essential part of how we reframe that collaboration. How do we become more discoverable? So 5 minutes. I've probably got a minute left. The story of Overleaf in terms of a tech transfer story is a really interesting one. So many of you are technical, so you probably will have spent many hours writing LaTeX documents. Overleaf came around in, 2013 and thought, well, why don't we create the same experience that you have in Google Docs, but for writing LaTeX documents. And that was a partnership, a collaboration. It was about orchestrating open source tools in the background, so all of those LaTeX compilers and all the things, everything else there, and making it accessible for a broader community. So in doing so, they've created a community of researchers. They have a product for which is valuable for industry. They now have 19 million users, and it's a really positive way of demonstrating how a company, that not everything that we do is open source, but a company can work with the community to orchestrate something in the middle ground that creates something that benefits everybody and also creates value for the company.
I think we're on time. David, is there anything else you want to say?